And now I'd like to introduce Sarah. Sarah is an actress, producer, and writer. For her latest film, A Call to Spy, Sarah wrote the original screenplay. She produced it and played the legendary American spy Virginia Hall. The project, released by IFC Films, has won numerous awards, including the Anti-Defamation League Stand-Up Award presented at the 2020 Santa Barbara International Film Festival and the Audience Choice Award at the Whistler Film Festival. Sarah's previous film was the groundbreaking Equity, in which she created the concept, co-wrote the story, produced, and starred in the film. She also starred in the romantic drama Backwards opposite James Van Der Beek and has appeared in various television shows, including Law and Order SVU. She has starred in numerous off-Broadway productions, such as the whimsical gender-bending Love's Labor's Lost. Our conversation today will be moderated by the museum's own education programs manager, Liz Eberlein, whose face you probably recognize from other Sundays at Home programs. So Liz, I will turn it over to you now.
Great. Thank you, Lorianne, for the introduction. And thank you, Sarah, so much for being here with us this afternoon to talk a little bit about this extraordinary film. So A Call to Spy details the lives of three really brave and courageous women who made the admirable choice to become part of this spy network and place themselves right in the heart of the dark and grim world of occupied France in the 1940s. It doesn't focus on one major event. No one here is gearing up for D-Day. They're not gearing up for the liberation of the concentration camps, at least not overtly. But it instead follows the women through the years of service and their aims to gather info to mess up Nazi plans. This is a lot of information. So as the writer of the film, how do you approach kind of such a large chunk of history and condense that into 120 minutes of film?
Yeah, I mean, that was the biggest challenge of this film, is that, you know, it follows three historical women. I had access to all their spy files. There's tons of information. It could be a 10-hour miniseries, which actually I'm going to be pitching later. But this was a 2-hour movie, and how do you decide what's in and what's out? And what I chose to focus on is the early part of the war. What was interesting to me to explore is women and men who signed up for an untested spy organization in 1941 when we were losing the war. And they didn't know if it would be a success. And they signed up anyway. And through the journey of the film, they find that, yes, it was a success, but also that these individual actions, these small individual actions do make a difference in the end. And I think that's a really timely theme with the world we live in right now, right? Like, without getting political or anything like that, it's just that we're learning in this pandemic world that little actions we take as a human being affect the world.
Absolutely. And one of the things, you know, of course, us being the National Women's History Museum and being very focused on women, one of the last slides at the end of the film, that it says that there were 39 women that Vera Atkins recruited, trained, and that were ultimately sent to France. When approaching the film, how did you choose who to focus your story around? Why these women specifically? Because they are very different. They come from very different backgrounds. They come from different nationalities. So they have very different stories to tell. So how do you choose these women to kind of bring together to tell this story?
That's a great question. I mean, I chose these three women specifically, Virginia Hall, Vera Atkins, and Nora and Virginia, because they were pioneers in the spy field. So they were the firsts. So Virginia Hall was the first female field agent. Nora and Virginia was the first female wireless operator. And Vera Atkins was kind of the first and only recruiter of these women. And why I put them together in this film is, like you said, they were women from different nationalities, different religions, a pacifist, a fighter, a Muslim, and a disabled woman, and a Jewish woman being discriminated against. And I thought that it would allow for a broader conversation of how our diversity can prove critical to the success of our respective missions than were I to just choose one of them. But the reason I chose those three is because they were kind of the pioneers.
Great. And we know, you know, just watching the film, we have Nora and Virginia who are in France and they're fighting kind of behind the lines. But I think it's also really important that we note that Vera, being back in London, she's not on firm footing herself. She's a Romanian Jew, she's an immigrant, and there's really this kind of invisible axe that's hanging over her head throughout the film, because she isn't a citizen. She isn't trusted by some of the people that she works for. Her citizenship papers are held up. Her fears of being deported are very legitimate at this time. Romania is an active member of the Axis powers, and if she's deported, she goes back to Romania, there's a likelihood that she'd be killed if she's sent back there. So how do you kind of balance that between, as you're writing and you're telling these stories, on the one hand, having them, Nora and Virginia, in France, and also showing that tension with Vera back in London?
Yeah, so the Citizenship Papers actually wasn't in the original scripts because, like you said, certain things can't fit in this 2-hour movie. But as I was going along in the writing and fundraising process, and things were happening in the world where it seemed really important to actually put it in the script. So it came in a little closer to shooting time. And, I consider London, Vera and Buckmaster kind of the hub, right? So the hub of the film, the home base of the film, the stakes of the film, the stakes of the war. So you have Nora and Virginia in the field and they're doing their operations. But the home base is London. And, Vera had a really interesting quote that she gave in an interview towards the end of her life that said that, I'm butchering the quote, but the essence was the hardest thing is to sit on the sidelines, right? So she had to sit on the sidelines and wait and watch. And she drove these women to the airfield, and she knew that most of them wouldn't come home, and this would be the last time they saw this countryside. And she said that that was exhausting. And she actually spent years after the war tracking down and finding what happened to each and every one of her missing agents. I mean, they were dead, but she wanted to make sure that the history was right and that she found out how they were killed.
And I think it's really, watching the film, I think there was a quote, and it also said, I think in one of the last slides, that there's a 50-50 chance that they're not coming home. I actually thought that was a really generous kind of percentage. I mean, when you're talking 50-50, you're thinking there is a 50% chance that I will come home. But when you get these agents behind the line, that you're talking dangers that nobody is even kind of realizing at the time. So I kind of found that very interesting that you're saying that there's a 50% chance that you're coming home, but in reality, it's probably considerably lower than that.
Yeah, I mean, and also depended on the job. I mean, a wireless like Nora, I mean, that life expectancy was 6 weeks in the field. And you know what? They were told that. It wasn't hid from them, and these people signed up anyway. And, that's actually the takeaway from the film that I hope people ask themselves. What would I do to put my lives on the line for the freedom of others? Would I sign up for an untested agency, knowing that maybe I could live 6 weeks? I'm a mom. I would hope that I would, but I don't know. I might not. I might not. And I think that's an uncomfortable question we should all be asking ourselves. What will we do to protect the freedom of everyone?
Yeah. So I watched the film with a few friends of mine. And one of the comments that a friend of mine made as we were watching the film was that she didn't realize that Nora and Virginia initially are being sent into unoccupied France. And what I don't think people not familiar with World War II and the occupation of France realize is that being in unoccupied France isn't necessarily better than being in occupied France. Vichy France is essentially a collaborationist regime with Nazi Germany. So for the spies that are sent to France, there really is no safe space for them. And as we see with Nora, and again with Virginia and the priest, knowing who to trust kind of becomes this guessing game that, unfortunately, if you guess wrong or you trust somebody who eventually, is turned, it becomes really a fatal game for many of these spies.
Totally. Yeah. No, I mean, that's the drama of the film, so to speak. It's not D-Day. It's not, going to find a soldier that's captured, a la like Saving Private Ryan. It's who do I trust? And frankly, the daily grind of survival that these spies had to live with. They were thrown into the field, extreme risk. They didn't have any tools at all. You know, the rules keep changing, the laws keep changing. And if you look the wrong way when you cross the street, you're dead, you're caught. And just the extreme, I was interested in the internal pressure that brings, you know, because this is an independent film. It's not a film with explosions and bombs and all that. So it's about the internal of processing that risk.
I think that's actually one of the things that I love the most about the film, is that there aren't any big action scenes, but there is this kind of palpable tension that you feel as you watch. You're in the moment with these women, you're feeling the constant fear and the wariness that they're feeling, and it really does draw you in, and you become very invested in the characters and whether they live or die. Without those action scenes, how do you create that tension just with words or with facial expressions, or just through the acting, without those explosions or kind of that tension of an action scene?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I think this film's a slow build, and it has to be a slow build because you have to care about the characters, and there's a payoff at the end, and you are emotionally, I hope, invested at the end. But it doesn't happen like that. And, you know, that's why, you know, on a personal note, I was devastated with the pandemic and theater closure, et cetera, because this is the type of film that's meant to be watched in a theater with people in one sitting to get that kind of drama, because you can't turn it off, turn it on, turn it off, because there aren't the explosion. It's not James Bond. The drama is getting connected in a visceral way to one of these ladies or all three of these ladies. But I mean, a lot of it was intentional in the writing and the editing in terms of, you know, not knowing who to trust.
Right. Yeah, I think, you know, I think that's something that's very hard for me to imagine, is going into a situation that I'm not familiar with, and I already know that it's a life or death situation, and you do have to trust people. I mean, you do kind of have to take a leap of faith and say that you do trust them, and knowing that you may be able to trust them at one moment, and then a few weeks later, if something happens, there's no trust there, but you don't realize that. I think that kind of keeps you on the edge of your seat as you're going through the whole movie, which, you know, gripped me at least. I don't know about anybody else, but that certainly kept me on the edge of my seat. But I think at one point, we hear Vera say in the movie that she wants to train the women like the men. And I think that really stuck with me, because it's 1941, these women are being thrown into the SOE as an experiment. As we were talking about a few minutes ago, there's a 50-50 chance of survival. It's really a trial and error situation, especially at that time, because the SOE is so new. And these women really are soldiers. They're risking their lives in life or death situations. They're putting aside the idea that women look like spies and that they're more inconspicuous than men. And they really did need to be trained like the men for their own survival, because you can't only count on being inconspicuous in a situation like that. And I think we see that with Virginia at one point, when they're trapped by the French officer, the Vichy officer, and they have to defend themselves, and we see her do that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's true of everything you said.
Yeah, it's you know, and I think that's something too. In you know, we see with Nora in the beginning of the film, she's a pacifist. I mean, she's willing to go in, she's willing to put her life on the line to do what she needs to do. But there's kind of this own moral line that she has to draw within herself to say, I'm willing to go this far, but this goes against my beliefs. So I think that's kind of a really interesting juxtaposition. Just between her background, her Muslim background, and what we see with Virginia too. So
totally, and total opposites in a lot of ways. And you know, Virginia thrives on danger. Historically, it's widely thought that her happiest times were during the war in France, and making a difference. And Noor was widely considered. Her training reports called her, you know, if this girl's a spy on Winston Churchill, she's a princess, she's not qualified. And yet, when Noor was captured, she tried to escape twice. She never gave up any information as she was tortured. I mean, she proved to be incredibly strong. So even though you have a pacifist and a quote unquote fighter, they both have the same internal strength just in different ways. And that's what I found fascinating in their kind of unlikely friendship.
Yeah. So before we've had a bunch of questions come in. So before we get to the Q&A from those that are attending, I want to ask a little bit more because the film shows it, but it doesn't really go into a whole lot of detail. When Virginia is escaping across the Pyrenees, and she has a wooden leg, and she's trying to escape. And just in my own research and what I've come across, that is a very dangerous escape route for anybody who is taking that. And for somebody who has a wooden leg, I imagine that it's 100 times more difficult. When you were kind of going into your research with Virginia, was that something that you came across? Was that something that had more detail?
I mean, well, that's true. It's true that she had Klaus Barbie came in to hunt her. She was the spy the Nazis dubbed the most dangerous of all, period, male, female, her, because she was an organizer and she knew how to rally the troops. She got people to resist. She was dangerous. And she had to escape over the Pyrenees, and she, as you mentioned, had a wooden leg. She tragically shot her foot off in a hunting accident when she was 27 with her father's shotgun, almost died, lost her leg. And, you know, imagine hiking over the Pyrenees in the snow anyway, like trying to escape the Nazis, but then imagine doing it in the 1940s with the prosthesis that doesn't fit because they were made for men back then. So what she has on her leg is this very rudimentary prosthesis where her stump is kind of all day long doing this, and she has blisters and she's in pain. And, you know, it must have been excruciating for her. In terms of filmmaking, we actually shot the Pyrenees in upstate New York. And it's a funny story because we couldn't afford to go to the Pyrenees, but we were in prep before shooting and we hadn't nailed down a location for the Pyrenees yet. And there was a snowstorm and we were like, oh my gosh, it's April, like the early April, this is gonna be it, it's the last snowstorm. So we took a skeleton crew and like that weekend raced up to upstate New York and shot all the Pyrenees first with a small crew. And I was really worried it wasn't gonna work. I was like, this is not, you know, like even as an actress, that's not really the scene you wanna warm up to, but,
Sure.
And then there's special effects in the back.
Well, the scene definitely works. I think, yeah, you know, for what it was, I think it definitely worked. And you know, with Virginia, you play Virginia, so you have this kind of unique perspective. You've written the film, but you're also playing kind of the one of the main characters in this film as well. With your research, you know, yes, she's the limping lady. She has a false leg. How do you kind of determine how to play that character? How much to limp, how much to not limp? Is there really kind of a historical record of that? Because she's called the limping lady, so obviously there is this limp, but I imagine it's not so pronounced that just walking down the street she's being picked out of a lineup.
Exactly. I mean, I did a ton of research. The Nazis called her the limping lady. They also thought she was Canadian. I mean, they didn't know, you know, they were just getting their kind of research from, you know, traders and reports. But if you I spoke with her living relatives, and I spoke with individuals at the CIA, because she was the first woman to work for the CIA after the war. And some people said she didn't limp that much at all because she didn't want anyone to know she had a wooden leg. She actively tried to hide it, except in that last scene in the film where she dressed up, where her cover was as an old lady. She actually worked to modify her limp to an old lady shuffle to fit the disguise. So I made the decision to underplay it versus overplay it. And you see it on the stairs, you know, you see it when she's walking uphill, but it wasn't something that I felt should be distracting. And it was something that, like, you know, she has it, so you don't have to keep illustrating it. Right. So while I was constantly limping, I was doing it in a way, because I felt like that was, you know, it's part of her, that leg. I was trying to do it in a way that was very subtle, because some people didn't know she had a limp. I mean, it depends on who you asked.
So one of the questions that's come in from the audience is kind of carrying on in this vein is, how did you research this movie? What books did you use write it? What historical records? You mentioned the CIA going in there. But how do you bring this history together? You know, how far do you dig to get this?
Well, you dig a lot, and then you can get in a rabbit hole, because you do have to ultimately write the 2-hour movie, and you could go down that research rabbit hole forever. But I did years of research. I did not rely on any books. It's not based on any books. In fact, the fiction that I put together in the film is putting Nora and Virginia in time and space. They were 2 years apart in the war. They never met. And the reason was we've discussed. But I stayed true to the arc of what happens to all of them. So, you know, I had their spy files, which are public, the archives, which was fascinating. You know, for Virginia, it's over 100 pages. A lot of it's her words and letters that she wrote back to London. I had Vera's spy files as well. Some of it's training reports. I spoke with friends. I spoke with living relatives where I could. And then you just have to put it away. Mm-hmm. And then you have to go back to it. So I even went back to it like in the edit room, on the set, like always bringing new things, because, you know, when you're editing it, you may think you have something, and test audiences aren't picking it up, or they don't know enough about World War II history, so you have to spoon feed them something else, so you go back to the research. So it's always there.
And we've had a few questions about the Lost Girls of Paris, the book. So was that book in any way an inspiration for writing the screenplay?
The screenplay, I haven't even read that book. The screenplay was actually done before that book came out. In fact, the screenplay was, the film was done before A Woman of No Importance came out, or Hall of Mirrors. It's very kismet. It's great. It's actually great that, I mean, there's like 5 books. There's another Virginia Hall book coming out in February. There's 5 books, Lost Girls, and 3 about Virginia Hall, and another one coming out, that came out when the movie was essentially done. And I think that's because, you know, these files are public now, and more people can get access to them, but also with the Me Too movement. And I think there's just a lot more interest in stories about women heroes. So it's great. The more the merrier.
Yeah. Was there a particular piece of research that you found to be the most valuable?
Definitely. Well, I would say definitely the spy files, because the SOE files, just because they're the files of what happens and you need them. And that's kind of the basic research. But then I will say the spy, you know, Virginia Hall never gave any interviews, right? While she was alive. Neither did Nora. Vera gave a few, but they were, you know, not hugely of substance. So while you have kind of the facts of what happened to these ladies, they're spies. So how do you get to the internal, and how do you do it in a way where you're respecting their legacy? Again, that was something that weighed heavily on me, because this is the first film about these women, and I wanted to make sure to be respectful. So I think another really helpful resource was speaking to Linda and Lorna and Brad Catling in terms of playing Virginia Hall, because I would get a sense of the personality. And what I mean by that is, oh, she wore a snake bracelet to school, you know, she called herself cantankerous. She was the pirate chief in the school plays. They sent me pictures of artifacts she had from her travels. And those details really helped inform the personality.
There was a question about kind of addressing in the film the Allied government's awareness of the extermination of Jews and their deliberate neglect to rescue the Jews, which the film doesn't necessarily address. You mentioned something about a mini-series. Is this something that, on this topic, is that kind of the mini-series that you're thinking about, or?
You know, I'm developing a mini-series, and we'll see, mini-series, you have to have a lot of money, right? And you have to have a network. I mean, you're talking about $100 million. I mean, because there's episodes, right? And what I would love to do is have the ability to tell the story in full, the full war, right? Because we don't get to D-Day, you know, or any of that, the full war, but also get more into home lives and the stakes of the war. You know, we only had so much real estate in this movie. But one thing that was really important to me is I tried to show things you haven't seen before in a World War II movie. So, you know, even if it was torture, how can I show the torture where you're seeing how bad it is, but keep the PG-13 rating so it can be educational for kids and make it indie friendly. So that's how we came up with the bucket. right? The bucket of hot water. It was a torture method used. You don't see it all the time. It's not overly gruesome, but you get the point, right, very quickly. Or with Nora's death, it's the same thing. Like, I didn't want it to be violence for violence sake. I wanted you to get the sense that she was murdered by the Nazis terribly, but also not like see her heroism. I wanted that moment to be her heroism for what she was doing for the world.
Yeah. Why do you think that this story hasn't been told before? Why, you know, especially with these three women, they're the first, really the first. So why is this the first time that this story is really being told?
You know, I get asked that question a lot, and I honestly don't know. I mean, it was the same. So my last film was the first female-driven Wall Street movie, Equity. And when I started doing the research and uncovered there was no movie about women on Wall Street, it was like, huh? Like, it was just like, okay, we've got to do that. And it was the same aha moment here. You know, I'd studied World War II in college, and I played Ava Braun off Broadway, and I knew the genre, I knew there were spies. But when I started digging into the research and then started digging into what films are there, well, there's Charlotte Gray. But if you look at like Charlotte Gray, for example, and I actually like Charlotte Gray, it's a great film, but she's a composite person, right? But B, she's going after the guy. It's a romance. So they've taken a resistance fighter and made her go after the guy, and that's why she's spying. And so I didn't want to do that.
Which is fair, absolutely fair. Yeah.
Right. But yeah, I don't know why. I think it's starting to happen. I think it again has to do with just Gina Davis Institute. They have a saying: if she can see it, she can be it. And they work really hard to publish the statistics on women in film, not just female directors and writers and screenwriters, where the percentages are terrible, but also when you're telling women's stories, the camera tends to be on the men more than the women. If you time it, they tend to have more lines, et cetera, et cetera. So they've been for, I don't know, maybe a decade now, really bringing awareness to what's missing. And I think it's starting to change.
Which, you know, again, an organization that focuses on women, we're always trying to find stories that haven't been told and to bring kind of new situations to light and tell it from a woman's perspective, because it is so often told from a male perspective. So have this film, I think, focus solely on three women and their courage and their intelligence and their bravery. It is really kind of spectacular, I think, you know, as you're watching this film, because you so often, as you just mentioned, when you have a film, it's very often tied to romance, and it's very refreshing to see these women, you know, not having a romance being a driving force behind that. So I think that's a very powerful component to the film. Not just the horrors that they witnessed and that they had to go through, but the entire film itself is just very, very powerful in all of these different ways. If this were to become, again, I'm kind of going through questions that are coming in. If this were to become a miniseries, would you continue to play Virginia Hall? Would you try to find an actress with a similar disability to portray her?
That's a great question. I don't know. I mean, it would depend on so many factors, including my professional schedule elsewhere. I do feel very connected to her. And one of the reasons I wanted to play her is, as I was doing the research, you know, this is a woman who was constantly told no, because of her gender, and then because of her disability. She wanted to be a diplomat, and they said no. So she found another way. You know, I really responded to her ability to take anything, and just say, okay, I'm going to do it another way, which in a totally different way is filmmaking. Like not in a dangerous way, but that. So, I mean, I really, and then I did a ton of research. I really viscerally respond to her, but whether or not I would do it in the miniseries is just, we'll see.
Yeah, which is so much of everything, I think, is, you know, we'll see. If it happens, you know, great. I think scheduling issue is probably part of it as well.
Totally. And I would say, like, I ruptured my own Achilles tendon playing the role. And so I had to have surgery, and I couldn't walk for a whole year. And so there's a piece of Virginia that will actually never leave me, because and it was the same leg, because I wore this very heavy contraption on my leg for the shooting, and I would wear it even if I was sitting and the camera's on the other person, because Cuthbert, who she named her prosthesis, was a part of her. And that was how I was able to get into character. I had to have something on my leg. Well, it weakened my own tendon, which completely ruptured.
Oh my God.
And so, you know, literally for an entire year, I couldn't walk. And I have a whole new, if that's possible, respect for not only Virginia, but the disabled community, because I didn't realize, you think you know, until you're not able to walk. I was in a wheelchair for a very long time, and I'm a very confident woman, and people, they look at you differently. You're at a lower level, they treat you differently, and it's not intentional at all. But I can only imagine in the 40s, again, you know, Virginia's leading up the resistance in Lyon, and she has this disability that she has to overcome, and it's just an incredible feat.
So why do you think these women chose to do this work, even when they're told that they could die? I mean, it really is kind of a testament to their courage. You know, but why? When you know that there is such a high probability that you are going to be sent over and not come back, why do you choose to do this?
I think it was that generation. I think it was everyone who fought in the war. I mean, they all said it was my duty. You know, even if they were being awarded a medal after the war, it was like, well, this is what, they didn't do it for the award. This is my duty. This is what I have to do. I think that's the common drive. There was a real, what's the word? I mean, there was a real community to humanity and to the global world and the duty to protect it that I don't know exists right now.
And Virginia's pulled out. She's compromised. She's pulled out. She goes across the Pyrenees, and she voluntarily goes back in. So I think that also kind of tells you everything that you need to know about the situation and the person that she is. But why does she go back in? Why does she's back in London, she's essentially safe. Why does she choose to gain a new skill so that she can be sent back in?
Virginia is not someone who could ever sit on the sidelines, right? And I think her friends were being captured. There was a traitor in the midst. That's true, Robert Alesh. But I think for her, it was just, I need to help. I can help and make a difference. And so you have to put me back, and I'm going to learn something else. And then she went back for a second tour. A couple of the women did go back for a second tour. I think once you do it, it's like, it's not like, oh, I made it to safety. It's like, I've got to get back there, and I now have friends to protect. And yeah.
So aside from Virginia, who of course was American, did you come across any other U.S. women who are part of the female spy networks?
No, not the French section of SOE. There might be someone who's part American, but I don't think so. They were largely British and French, although they came from all over. It's actually, there was a mom of 3 daughters. There was a socialite. I mean, it was really a smorgasbord of what I would call underdogs who rose to the occasion.
And what becomes, again, we see with the end slides, Virginia is denied being a diplomat, but she becomes the first woman in the CIA. But what becomes, kind of beyond that, what becomes of Virginia and Vera? Of course, we know what happens to Nora, but after the war, what becomes of the both of them?
So Virginia worked for the CIA until she retired. She married an OSS agent. OSS is the precursor to the CIA. So when she went back for her second tour, she worked for the OSS. She married a fellow agent she met in France, Paul. They lived together, then they got married. He cooked, and they lived on a farm eventually, and, with dogs, I think, and she retired, and then she died of essentially old age. She didn't have, she had missions and stuff, but she didn't have the exploits of what it was like to spy in France again. I think it was a quieter life, relatively. And then Vera spent, the rest of her life literally figuring out what happened to these women. She interviewed, she got the record straight. And then, when she so I'm actually quoting her obituary that said like she retired to somewhere where like on a clear day over the sea you could see France. I don't even know if that's true, but I thought it was very poetic.
Yeah. And we kind of have a research question, which I can also help answer as well. But somebody has heard that a family member was a spy during World War II and is wondering how they can access kind of any of those archives. Is there kind of any pointers or tips as you were coming across any of these as you were doing your research that you can kind of handle?
You know, it's all, you just have to write letters. Like the National Archives in London, they're open. You just have to make research requests. It's the same when I got the OSS files. You just go online and you make research requests. And it takes a little bit of time, but you know, it's fairly easy.
Yeah. And I know not specifically spies, but the World War II Museum has extensive archives. There are all sorts of museums and archives throughout the United States as well. I don't know specifically what this audience member, you know, where they were coming from or who they were, but there are ways to kind of go about, but it's like Sarah said, it's identifying those archives and writing letters, and if those are declassified, you can get that information. So the question is how and when will the film be released? It's already been released. There you can find it streaming. I watched it on Amazon Prime. There are other avenues that you can stream the film as well. It is also in select theaters, correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's if you go to acalltospymovie.com, acalltospymovie.com, it has the trailer, it has everything, and then it actually lists where to watch at home. It wasn't a lot of theaters. I think theaters are starting to shut down, but it lists pretty much everything. It's in Canada as well. We're actually premiering as an Amazon original in India on December 11th, and we will be in cinemas in Australia and New Zealand, if you know people there, starting December 26th.
Wonderful.
But it goes to, you know, one point I will mention is the way to see more female stories like this is to support them by watching them, because if this film makes money, people will make more movies. So, you know, whether it's supporting this film or other female stories, it's really important to buy them. And if you like them, tell other people so that we can keep making the stories.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have time for a few more questions. Again, if anybody's interested in asking a question, please use the Q&A. I've been going through questions for the last several minutes, so please keep asking. What did you do to transform your appearance within the film?
So we had 2 wigs. So that was kind of the easiest transforming. I had a blonde wig for a disguise and then a brunette wig. And then that was it. Actually, we didn't use much makeup because there wasn't really much makeup that was worn. You know, there was no money for, you know, fake noses or what Hollywood would do. But actually, I think it's kind of interesting, you know, with the actresses we've hired, you know, Stana Katic, who plays Vera Atkins, Nora Nayat Khan, who plays, Radhika Apte, who plays Nora Nayat Khan. The actors had the essence of the character. And so I just didn't feel the need to make it an exact replica. I just wanted them to capture the spirit, if that makes sense.
Great. So one last question is Valerie Plame, who is more of a kind of contemporary, you know, female spy, I guess. The question is, do you consider Valerie Plame as one of the modern day heroes that you were talking about just a few minutes ago?
Oh gosh, you know, that's a great question. I honestly haven't thought of that before. I mean, yeah, I mean, I think there's just so many heroes. And I think, yes, I think we need to expand our definition of what a hero is. And maybe that's the point of the film too. It's not just soldiers with guns necessarily who go out there to battle and are wounded or killed or killed. There's all different definitions of heroes in the CIA and as women who serve.
Well, and I think especially in World War II as well, I think that's a really great point, because it's not just the soldiers, it's the resistance in France. It is an entire network who are working to kind of undermine, you know, the Germans' advance and blow up railroads and, you know, work to set up all of this network. So when you're really talking about World War II, it really does take a literal village to make this happen, because it's not just the soldiers, it's the boots on the ground civilians who are defending their homelands before the soldiers can even get there, because we're talking about 1940, 41, 42. D-Day doesn't happen until June of 1944. So this is happening for quite a while before we even have soldiers, Allied soldiers in France to kind of take back the country.
And actually, Dr. Chauvin, who, he's a composite character, so I changed his name, but he's partially based on a real life French resistance fighter in Virginia's network named Dr. Rousseau, who was a French gynecologist, and he helped Virginia. And there was a woman in a brothel as well who helped Virginia. And it goes to your point that, like, there are a lot of people in history in that definition of heroes who slip through the cracks because they just do it and they're not, and they don't get, I hate the word famous, but you know what I mean. There's lots of heroes that support the larger mission that we don't know about.
Why don't we have more stories like this? Meaning women interested in stories like female spies in World War II, or your previous film, Equity, the first women in Wall Street. So why, and I think it's becoming a little bit more prevalent now, kind of post Me Too, but why are we just now getting these stories, I guess, is really kind of the point.
It's a business, right? It's a film business. And so these films have to, as I mentioned before, have a proven track record for making money, and Equity did. But above and beyond that, it takes more female producers and creators and screenwriters to create the content. So, what I like to say is I could have never created the movie Boyhood if anyone's seen that film, right? Because I wouldn't have written that. I wouldn't have thought, that's not my experience. I didn't grow up as a boy. You know what I'm saying? And so it takes more women, like I said earlier, the statistics in film are not great, to take the initiative and say, I want to be the change I want to see. I'm going to tell those stories myself. I'm going to raise the money myself, even though that's difficult. I'm going to, make this happen. And then I'm going to hire more women. I'm going to hire female directors, composers, etc. Make it happen.
So if you had kind of a one takeaway from the film that you want to leave us with today, what is kind of one thing that you would say is the thing that you'd want us to know after we leave here today that you want us to remember?
Well, watch the film if you haven't seen it and spread the word. But then from the film itself, that individuals can and do make a difference. So the takeaway is whatever you believe in, whether it's voting or wearing a mask or whatever it is, you make a difference. Because I think sometimes in this world we can feel that we don't. And it starts with small steps. And that's what these women did. Small steps made a big difference.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank you so very much for taking the time to be here with us today to answer all of our questions, tell us a little bit more about these extraordinary women. I also want to remind everybody that we have recorded this. This will be up on our website in the next few days, so please be on the lookout for that. Please, if you have not watched the film, please watch the film. It's absolutely spectacular. You can watch, we have a link on our website that will link you to A Call to Spy, the website. It will tell you where you can stream the film. So please take a look at the film. And again, thank you all for being here.